Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, doom enthusiasts, geopolitical thrill seekers, and 3 Western intelligence interns assigned to watch this show because their bosses are too scared to explain the news themselves. Welcome to live show 158, broadcasting from our fully equipped studio in Minsk, not from a mold-stained spare room that looks like it was repossessed from the Addams family, and not from the pavement while wandering around like a confused NPC mumbling, yeah, so, anyway, as if your brain has poor signal strength. We do not buffer, we do not wander, and we don't film in locations that scream, my life fell apart, but at least I have a webcam. Tonight's theme is simple, trust the grown-ups, because apparently the people steering the global order are wise, stable, well-informed professionals, despite behaving like a council of sleep-deprived raccoons fighting over a broken compass. Here's the ride we've got for you tonight. A deep dive into how Pearl Harbor became the Swiss Army knife of political manipulation. That's today, December 7th, of course. The Imperial order unravelling like a cheap knockoff suit bought on wish.com. Europe's mask falling off so hard it broke on the way down. The global south quietly building a world that actually functions. Australia, my home country, launching the digital equivalent of martial law on teenagers. And humanity preparing for AGI, the invention that will automate everything except government incompetence. This is not a world led by adults. This is a world led by people who press random buttons, call it policy, and then blame Russia, China, or disinformation when the machine explodes. But don't worry, you're not stuck with the official narrative. You're here, watching the show produced by an actual studio with actual preparation, actual research, and actual sentences structured around more than one functioning brain cell. So let's begin tonight's tour of the geopolitical clown maze, as we start with a classic that never gets old, because politicians won't stop weaponizing it. Pearl Harbor and memory warfare. Tonight we begin with an event so iconic, so defining, so mythologized that Hollywood has spent more time rewriting it than Japan ever spent planning it. Pearl Harbor. Yes, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. And apparently also in every government's drawer marked useful historical analogies to manipulate the public. We all know the official script, America, innocent and dozing peacefully, sipping coconut water in Hawaii, when suddenly, out of nowhere, boom, the Japanese attacked, shocking a naive nation into World War II. Except, of course, history is messier, more complicated, and far less convenient for geopolitical bedtime stories. But that's the beauty of memory warfare. You select the version that gets the population emotionally charged, morally aligned, and ready to follow whatever foreign policy stunt your leadership has planned for the next 80 years. Because Pearl Harbor isn't just history, it's infrastructure, it's political capital, it's a rhetorical weapon. Anytime the US needs to justify a new military adventure, someone inevitably says, "Remember Pearl Harbor?" Translation, get angry and stop asking questions. And that's the trick, isn't it? Memory becomes a tool, a platform, a factory of emotional obedience. Countries do this everywhere. In Japan, Pearl Harbor is often framed as a tragic escalation within a larger geopolitical pressure cooker, not exactly the Hollywood version where they woke up one morning and decided to cosplay as a superpower. China uses World War II memory, the invasion, the massacres, to define national unity and justify vigilance against Western interference. Russia uses the Great Patriotic War as a psychological fortification against the idea of foreign invasion, past or present. And the West? Oh, the West uses Pearl Harbor as shorthand for, we were victims then, we are victims now, and therefore we must defend freedom by blowing up something 8,000 kilometers away. Memory is a toolkit. Whoever controls it controls the narrative. Whoever controls the narrative controls public consent. This is why history gets rewritten, repackaged, rebranded, and resold more often than iPhones. But Pearl Harbor also reminds us of something bigger. War doesn't erupt over nothing. There are always warning signs, pressures, provocations, miscalculations, and geopolitical blind spots. But those details tend to get edited out because they ruin the simplicity of morality play. And countries love morality plays. They turn geopolitics into a children's book. Good guys, bad guys, surprise attacks, heroic comebacks. It's easier to manage a population when the story is that clean. But the world we operate now, today, doesn't allow clean stories. You can't run 21st century geopolitics on World War II narratives without crashing into reality. And yet, leaders keep trying. They invoke 1941 whenever they need more military spending. They invoke Munich when they want to oppose diplomacy. They invoke appeasement whenever someone suggests peace talks. We're living in a geopolitical theatre where every crisis must be Pearl Harbor, every rival must be Hitler, every negotiation must be Munich. It's convenient, it's manipulative, and it's dangerously outdated. Memory warfare turns the past into a weapon and the public into ammunition. So as we mark today, December 7th, let's honour history by not letting it be recycled into propaganda, because if we keep running foreign policy through Hollywood flashbacks, we're going to end up with sequels nobody asked for. And speaking of sequels nobody asked for, let's talk about the modern imperial system, the one that ruled the world for 500 years and now is collapsing faster than European industry. Now let's talk about the imperial order, that 500-year Eurocentric project that began with Carvels, continuing with colonies, matured into Bretton Woods, and now appears to be collapsing like a souffle baked in a power outage. For centuries, Europe, later with the US as its hyperactive sidekick, acted as the world's author, editor, and censor. They wrote the rules, enforced the rules, and updated the rules whenever those rules suddenly became inconvenient. This system told the world, you'll trade what we want at the prices we want, using the currencies we control through institutions we built, and you'll smile when doing it because we call this freedom. Charming. But here's the twist. The imperial order isn't being defeated. It's running out of credit. Industrial, moral, economic, demographic, political, all at once. Let's break down the reasons the empire is wobbling like a Jenga tower missing its entire metal column. Europe once produced the world's ships, steel, and ideas. Now it produces think tank reports, energy crisis, and creative excuses for deindustrialization. Meanwhile, Asia, especially China, manufactures everything from microchips to bullet trains, while the West debates whether building a railway might upset environmental guidelines from 1994. You cannot run a global empire if you no longer make things. It's hard to dominate when your factories are silent and your energy bills look like ransom notes. The West believed it could offshore industry, import cheap goods, and still remain the centre of global power. What actually happened? They offshored their industrial capacity, hollowed out their middle class, and handed geopolitical leverage to the very countries they now call strategic threats. If this was a chess game, the West just sacrificed its queen to take a pawn it already owned. During the pandemic, Western governments attempted the boldest experiment since the invention of the central bank. What if we could permanently digitize human movement and issue permission slips for life itself? They built QR codes, societies, digital passes, centralized health IDs, a lovely blueprint for a global control grid. But that project failed. Public backlash, logistical dysfunction, and political fractures killed the dream. The empire tried to put the world on a digital leash and discovered the leash snapped. And then the West thought it could provoke Russian intervention, crash the Russian economy, trigger political collapse in Moscow, seize Ukraine's resources, and secure Europe as an energy-dependent protectorate. But instead, Russia adapted, sanctions backfired, Europe deindustrialized faster than anyone predicted, and the Western elites suddenly discovered that strategic autonomy means something other than clapping along with Washington. The attempt to prolong the war as a tool of imperial management exposed the West's shrinking capacity for actual power projection. Then there's the proposed peace framework now circulating, one that includes legal constraints on military escalation, cooperation between Eurasia and West, and a new financial architecture for reconstruction. It terrifies the old imperial faction because peace kills their business model. If Russia formally commits not to expand military operations beyond current lines, then the war budgets collapse, public fear evaporates, politicians lose their favourite talking point, and the propaganda narrative of the Russians will be in Paris by Tuesday becomes unusable. Peace is now a threat, war is the product, and Europe is the customer. So an empire that once lived off other nations' collateral is now running on fumes. It cannot win wars, cannot rebuild industry, cannot maintain credibility, and cannot scare the world into obedience. The imperial order isn't being challenged, it's dying of its own decisions. And with the old imperial operating system glitching harder than a Windows 95 machine running modern software, the first region to feel the consequences is, of course, Europe. The continent that once dictated global affairs now can't even dictate its own energy policy without phoning Washington like a panicked teenager calling home on a school trip. Let's zoom in on the part of the collapsing order where the cracks aren't subtle, they're structural, loud, and occasionally wearing a suit. Europe's mask slips. Europe, the continent that once ran half the planet, invented fine art, philosophy, classical music, and now can barely keep the lights on without a liquefied natural gas shipment from Texas. Europe used to be the centre of civilization. Now it's a geopolitical equivalent of a retired rock star forced to take backup gigs for a US carrying cables, sound check microphones, and being told, just nod along and don't embarrass the band. Tonight's theme is simple. Europe's mask has slipped. The empire is gone. The autonomy is gone. The credibility is gone. And the rest of the world can see it clearer than Europe can. Let's start with the most humiliating political moment of the decade. The Nord Stream pipelines blowing up in 2022. That was Europe's main energy artery. It exploded. Everyone knows who did it. Everyone knows why. And Europe's response was, well, accidents happen. No investigation, no outrage, no accountability, just a continent pretending not to notice its own house burning down. Instead of demanding answers, Europe sprinted to buy overpriced American LNG like a panicked man buying chocolates and flowers after forgetting his anniversary. This wasn't just dependency, this was willing submission. And Germany, once the industrial heart of the world, has now turned to a museum exhibit of what happens when energy policy is written by a combination of activists, lobbyists, and people who think wind turbines generate GDP. Since the US Inflation Reduction Act, European industry has been stampeding towards America like it's Black Friday at Walmart. Factories closing, energy prices exploding, supply chains collapsing. Europe keeps insisting it's leading the green transition, which is true. They've transitioned from an industrial economy to a nostalgic one. And as Europe tried to stand up to China by imposing tariffs on Chinese EVs, China said, oh, adorable, here's 15% more exports. Brussels was left blinking like a confused Brussels sprout. The continent that once colonized the world now can't even negotiate with a car manufacturer. And then, of course, there's Europe's relationship with Ukraine, which has become the world's most expensive subscription service. They send money, they send weapons, they send promises of EU membership. And in return they receive higher energy costs, lower living standards, angry protests, political instability, and the honour of paying America's geopolitical bar tab. Meanwhile, Washington unveiled a peace plan in early 2025 without asking Europe's opinion, because why would you ask the kids at the table what they think about dessert? And as the US and China decide the 21st century, Europe isn't just sidelined, it's not even on the guest list. Trump's meets Xi to reshape global supply lines. Europe learns about it from the press release. BRICS expands. Europe releases a sternly worded letter nobody reads. Africa and Middle East and Asian realign. Europe declares this is concerning, and then goes back to debating light bulb wattage regulations. And currently the median age in Europe is 44. The median mood is tired. It's hard to project power when you can't even project optimism. Future growth, 1.2% if they're lucky, maybe 0% if France's next protest season stretches into overtime. The empire didn't fall. It shrunk quietly into the administrative region managed by the American foreign policy establishment. So Europe outsourced security to the US, energy to China, to Russia, manufacturing to China, common sense to Brussels. Now the bills have arrived, and Europe is shocked, absolutely shocked, that this didn't produce strategic autonomy. The mask has slipped. The world sees the decline. Only Europe pretends not to notice. And meanwhile, outside the Western bubble, something massive is happening. A new global gravity center is rising. Conferences, institutions, ideas and cooperation that no longer needs Western approval. So let's zoom out right now, far beyond Europe's nervous breakdown, NATO's proxy playground and Washington's foreign policy improv comedy, and look at the actual story of the 21st century. The world is moving on, quietly, calmly and very deliberately, not away from peace, away from Western hegemony. A new global centre of gravity is forming, and it's absolutely not waiting for Brussels or Washington to approve the agenda. In fact, the rest of the world has reached that magical parenting moment where they finally say, "We love you, but no, we're not listening to you anymore." In the old days, serious global events took place in Paris, London, New York, places with monuments, museums and overpriced coffee. Now, the most important summits on peace, development, multipolarity and global governance happen in Beijing, Shanghai, Doha, Johannesburg, New Delhi, Brasilia. These aren't alternative venues. These are the new centres of conversation where countries talk to each other without the West moderating the panel like a disappointed schoolteacher. And when people from 50 countries meet outside the Western bubble, magical things happen. Dialogue replaces propaganda. Mutual learning replaces lectures. Peace becomes something you build, not something you bomb into existence. It's almost like cooperation works better when it isn't happening inside a NATO press room. The Western media presents China as a dystopian surveillance monolith run by 1.5 billion robots with facial recognition. But people who actually go there come back saying, the trains work, the cities are clean, people live normally, and the infrastructure isn't held together with duct tape. And the gap is enormous. Those who have never been to China hate it. Those who have been there say, it wasn't anything like I was told. And this isn't being about pro-China. It's about recognizing that 1/5 of humanity deserves to be understood as reality, not caricature. But Western elites don't do curiosity. They do fear projection. This is the biggest conceptual divide between the emerging world and the West. The Western model treats peace like a bad bandage after the bombs, after the sabotage, after the regime change, after arms sales. The new multipolar model treats peace like infrastructure, something you build before conflict, not after your foreign policy explodes in your face. China's Belt and Road isn't just railways and ports. It's the ideas that countries who rely on each other economically don't go to war just because a senator from Ohio needs a soundbite. Connectivity reduces conflict unless you're Europe, which keeps disconnecting itself from everything. Here's the fun symmetry. People across Asia, Africa and Latin America study Western economics, history, arts and politics. Western universities barely acknowledge non-Western thought exists. And of course this means the global south knows the west far better than the west knows the global south. And in any negotiation, the side that knows the most wins. It is extremely difficult to run the world when you don't understand most of it. The old Imperial order faces two futures: explosion, military escalation, proxy wars, false flags, the desperate attempt to claw back control, or implosion, economic stagnation, political fragmentation, internal social collapse, the quiet shrinking of power. The global south is betting on implosion. NATO seems to be betting on explosion, and neither is sustainable. In a world with many centres, many voices, and many paths to development is being born right now. The West can join it or keep shouting from the sidelines. And while the global south is building new infrastructure, new peace models, new currency systems, Australia, my home country, is building something too, a digital prison for teenagers. Which brings us to the next segment, the demise of the wild web and how Australia decided to fix the internet by breaking it. Now let's visit my home country, the land of kangaroos, drop bears and governments who believe the solution to modern society is banning children from YouTube. Yes, we're talking about Australia, the country that decided the greatest threat to national security is not inflation, not housing, not foreign policy incompetence, but a 14-year-old watching Minecraft tutorials. Because on December 10th, Australia will become the first nation on earth to digitally evict every citizen under 16 from the world's biggest video platform and other social media channels. No warning, no phasing, just get off the internet, kids. Daddy Canberra said so. For years, Australia treated social media, and of course YouTube, like a harmless library where people watched cooking videos, conspiracy theories, and that one man reviewing $2 Japanese pencils for 40 minutes. But then the regulators have a revelation. Wait, people talk to each other on YouTube. That makes it social media. And once it's social media, it falls under Australia's brand new age verification laws. Laws so strict they make the Chinese firewall look like a friendly suggestion. The punishment for non-compliance? Just a tiny slap on the wrist. $32.5 million per violation. Even Google, owner of the universe's largest data farms, looked at that number and said, nope, goodbye children. Of course, YouTube politely warned blocking under 16s might make children less safe online, which is Silicon Valley language for we can't track them, we can't target ads, we can't monetize them. Please don't do this. Australia responded with its signature of bureaucratic compassion. Not our platform, fix your platform. This is the same government that still thinks screenshots are photographs. Australia now has the world's first nationwide no minors online zone. Of course, TikTok folded instantly. Snapchat surrendered like a French garrison on a comedy sketch. Meta said, yes sir, please sir, anything you say sir. But Reddit and X, they said no, because nothing excites a tech bro like telling a government to shove their policy into the cloud. The consequence? Australia unintentionally proved that governments can control the internet if they are willing to nuke the user base. Now regulators worldwide are salivating. Brussels, Washington, London and Ottawa, all thinking the same thing. Wait, we can just do that? Europe has been waiting for a guinea pig to test digital ID enforcement. Australia hopped willingly into the cage. Now prepare for biometric age checks, government-issued digital ID, browser-level monitoring, device fingerprinting, facial recognition for TikTok. Oof. All in the name of safety. Remember, every authoritarian policy begins as a child protection policy. And when you block minors from mainstream platforms, guess what happens? They don't disappear, they migrate to the darkest parts of the internet. VPN tunnels, encrypted apps, anonymous video mirrors, pirate sites, shadow communities. So congratulations Canberra, you took teens out of moderated platforms and shoved them into a cyberpunk alleyways. Now YouTube faces two choices. One, become a global digital border checkpoint with ID verification, biometrics and Orwellian surveillance. Two, become a TV channel where teenagers cannot exist, the world's dullest content platform. Either way, the original chaotic, democratic, creative YouTube is gone. And of course, this isn't about kids. It's about government realizing we can control the internet if we get authoritarian enough. Australia picked up the hammer. Now everyone else wants to swing it. We're entering an era of upload permissions, identity enforced browsing, algorithm licensing, censorship disguised as digital hygiene. Of course, the Wild Web is now dead. Welcome to the sanitized, supervised, state-approved internet. And speaking of things that will absolutely transform human existence, either into utopia or the end of humanity, let's talk AI. And now for our final stop tonight. Let's leave behind collapsing empires, panicking politicians, and Australia's crusade against teenage YouTube addiction, and talk about something actually important. The invention that might end human civilization or reinvent it. Artificial General Intelligence, AGI. While leaders argue about pipelines, pronouns, and who gets to join which military alliance, the tech world is quietly working on a project far more consequential, building a mind smarter than the species that built it. Because by 2027, according to prediction markets, researchers and labs themselves, AGI isn't science fiction, it's a calendar event. For 200,000 years, humans have enjoyed a comfortable monopoly on general intelligence. Well, that's ending. AGI means a system that can learn anything, not just language or images or coding, but all human cognitive tasks at once. The shock won't be killer robots marching down the street. The shock will be waking up one morning and discovering that everything done on a computer can now be done instantly for free by something that never sleeps. Every spreadsheet, every legal brief, every business plan, every graphic, every analysis, every episode outline of even this show. AGI eliminates the concept of knowledge work. It's not replacing your job, it's replacing jobs as an idea. And of course the people ask, will AI replace accountants, lawyers, coders, writers? No, that's adorable. AGI replaces all of them simultaneously, not by doing tasks better, but by doing them instantly, at scale, with no training, and with zero cost. In previous revolutions, humans upgraded from manual labor to cognitive labor. This time, the upgrade target is the brain itself. There's nowhere to retreat to. Economists love to reassure us. Don't worry, new jobs will appear. Yes, like AI prompt stylist, human creative liaison, or the guy who checks the machines haven't taken over. Cute. But by 2030, humanoid robots will become practical, not the clunky prototypes that fall over when sneezed on. I mean general purpose machines that can clean, cook, assemble, repair, move goods, and care for people. And thanks to AGI, they won't need training. They'll learn in seconds what humans learn in years. A world that once required billions of workers suddenly needs almost none. For society, this raises two questions. One, how do we distribute wealth when wages no longer exist? Two, how do humans find purpose when the work disappears? Because free time is only fun in small doses. Make it permanent and people invent new ways to go insane. Once AGI begins improving itself, you get a runaway intelligence. The upgrade cycle collapses. A year, a month, a week, a day, an hour. Humans simply cannot understand what the system is doing anymore. It's like watching your dog trying to understand cryptocurrency. You can explain it, but we'll never ever get it. Of course, people still say, if AI gets dangerous, we'll just unplug it. Right. If the ocean misbehaves, we'll just drain it. Modern AI is distributed, cloud-based, redundant, self-replicating. You can't turn off a global organism. This isn't your grandmother's toaster. Once AGI surpasses human intelligence, the idea of control becomes nostalgia. If AGI is aligned with humanity, it solves energy, disease, climate, scarcity, war, resource limits. If misaligned, even slightly, it doesn't launch nukes. It optimizes the world in ways we don't include us. Not out of malice, just out of indifference. Humanity becomes a rounding error. AGI isn't the next invention, it is the last invention. The moment intelligence becomes a universal utility. We stand between a world of abundance or a world where humanity is politely retired. Either way, the 2020s will be remembered not for politics or wars or economic crises, but for the moment the human species built something it can no longer understand. And on that uplifting note, let's wrap up tonight before the algorithm finishes rewriting the script for me. Well, ladies and gentlemen, government's secretly tuning in, and a handful of intelligence analysts assigned to monitor this program for signs of ideological deviation. That wraps up Live Show 158. Tonight we covered more ground than NATO logistics, from Pearl Harbor's memory warfare to the collapsing Imperial order, to Europe's identity crisis, to the rise of a multipolar world, to Australia's bold attempt to fix the internet by deleting children, and finally humanity's possible extinction via AGI, the feel-good segment of the night. And you've made it through all that without needing emotional support or a stiff drink. Congratulations. You're officially more resilient than most Western foreign policy planners. And let's be honest, we've learned tonight that the grown-ups running the world are about as competent as a raccoon operating heavy machinery. They lecture, they moralise, they panic, they escalate, and then they wonder why everything keeps catching fire. Meanwhile, you and I, we're just here documenting the collapse with good lighting and better sarcasm. A huge thank you to everyone watching live from Minsk, London, New York, Sydney, Hong Kong, Johannesburg, and of course to the VPN-enabled youth of Australia who may or may not be committing digital tax evasion just to watch this show. You're the reason this channel keeps growing, you're the reason the algorithms keep panicking, and you're the reason we'll keep doing this, with more facts, more humour, more irreverence, and more honesty than the entire Western political class combined. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and bother all the right people with tonight's content. Share the segments, tag your friends, trigger your enemies, and make this the geopolitical equivalent of leaving a banana peel on the floor of the information war. Of course, we'll be back on Wednesday on 9 p.m. Minsk time, 6 p.m. London, 1 p.m. New York, with more unfiltered analysis, more global chaos, and of course your weekly reminder that AGI is coming, whether your government can handle it or not. Until then, stay skeptical, stay alert, stay amused, and stay on from the other side. Bye.